Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Nikunjot Kaur. In this lecture, we will study the introduction to basic biology. As far as the definition is concerned, biology in simple terms is the study of life. That includes the study of organisms like plants, animals, microorganisms, as well as human beings. Biology is basically the study of living beings. Now, let us first understand what is life or what do we mean by being alive. Any entity that takes nutrition, that grows, that respires, that reproduces, that produce young ones, and that has feelings or that is sensitive is known as a living being. Life or being alive has 7 main criteria, that is take up of nutrition, then growth, respiration, reproduction, sensitivity, and excretion. Any entity or anything that shows all 3 criteria, all 3 properties, that is considered living. Now we are all surrounded by a number of living beings, numerous living beings, beautifully colored, differently and variedly shaped, having different sizes. All these living beings, they are made up of one basic unit, that is cell. Cell is just like bricks for a building, and depending upon the number of cells one living organism contain, we can divide them into 2 main types. One are unicellular organisms, the other are multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms are, for example, bacteria, archaea, yeast, and fungi. These are the organisms where one single cell acts as a whole organism. A whole organism. It can function, it can perform every function of nutrition, function of excretion, function of sensitivity, function of reproduction, function of respiration, function of growth. It shows all these 3 criteria. And the second one is multicellular. Multicellular is when an organism is made up of a number of cells, right? Number of cells, they come together and form one organism, then they are known as multicellular organisms. For example, all the flora and fauna we see around us, all the visible living beings which we can see, they are all multicellular in nature. Now coming to types of the cells. Cells are basically of 2 types, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic, the word karyotic has come from the word karyon. Karyon means nucleus. Prokaryotic cells are the cells which were existing before the existence of nucleus. Nucleus is a separate body which contains genetic material in it, right? Prokaryotic cells, they are simple ones. They have a single strand of DNA which is present in the cytoplasm itself. They are unicellular, they exist as unicellular entities, and they divide by binary fission, and they are haploid. Haploid means they have single set of genes. Then the eukaryotic ones are, eu means which have karyon, right? Which has nucleus. Eukaryotic cells, they are complex cells which have different compartments, and these compartments are meant for different functions, right? They contain nucleus, they contain other membrane bodies which perform different functions. They exist as multicellular organisms. They are present in multicellular organisms. The only one exception is yeast. Yeast is a single eukaryotic cell, only single cell eukaryotic cell which exists as whole organism, right? All other organisms, they multicellular organisms, they are eukaryotic in nature, but they are multicellular. They divide by the process of mitosis and meiosis, and they are diploid in nature. Diploid means they have two sets of chromosomes. Coming to discovery of the cells, in 1665, English scientist Robert Hooke, he discovered cells while looking at a thin slice of cork. He was studying a thin slice of cork. He watched that there were small compartments, small tiny boxes, honeycomb-like boxes, which were joined together. A number of them were present there, and he gave them the term cell. At that time, cells were the apartments where monks used to live. Right? The term cell today describes a microscopic unit of life that separates itself from its surroundings by a thin partition, which is known as cell membrane. At that time, Robert Hooke thought that they only existed in plants and fungi, because he could study only plants and fungi, and he thought that cells only existed in plants and fungi. Then in 1673, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, he devised a microscope, and the advantages of this microscope was that he had very precise lenses, and when he was watching plants come under the microscope, he saw some single-celled organisms which were roaming around, and he called those animals animal cubes. He also observed blood of a number of organisms like fish, birds, frogs, dogs, and humans, and he observed that the blood also contains a number of cells. So it was known that the cells were found in animals also along with the plants. Then in 1838, the German botanist Matthias Schleden, he concluded that all the plant parts are made up of cells, right? And in 1839, German physiologist Theodor Schwann, who was a close friend of Schleden, he stated that all animal tissues are also composed of cells. Both Schleden and Schwann, they jointly gave the cell theory. This cell theory stated that, sorry, then after these scientists, in 1858, another development happened in cell theory. Before 1858, most of the biologists, they believed that life arose spontaneously from an inanimate matter, right? But the details of how it could have happened, it remained unknown for a very long time. Then in 1858, Rudolf Virchow, he was a German physician, and he was studying pathology, cellular pathology. After the extensive study, he concluded that cells must arise from pre-existing cells, and he gave a very common phrase, very popular phrase, omnis cellula a cellula, that cells, they arise from the cells which are already existing. So all these the scientists' findings, they made the cell theory. It had basic three components. Number one, all the organisms are composed of one or more cells. It was given by Schleden and Schwann in 1838-39. Then they also stated that cell is the basic unit of life in all the living things, and all the cells, they produce by division of pre-existing cells. Now, this theory had certain shortcomings or certain objections. They couldn't explain a number of things. Like Schwann, for instance, he believed that the cells could be spontaneously generated, right? But the studies of the developing embryo show that during growth, cells duplicated themselves by division. In many organisms, the body is not differentiated into cells, though it may have nuclei. It, it doesn't mean that one cell should have one nuclei only. They observed that there are a number of organisms which has multinucleate cells, right? Then Schleden and Schwann, they didn't know that mechanism of cell formation. that time, and Sladen thought that new cells were developed from nucleus or cytoplast, and Swan believed that the cells were developed spontaneously, just like a crystal. Then, after extensive studies, after looking through these shortcomings, the scientists devised modern cell theory, and this is also known as cell principle, which is applicable in all the studies of biology and cell biology and other biologies. That states that all organisms are composed of cells and their products, right? Number one, new cells they arise from pre-existing cells. Number two, all the cells are basically alike in chemical composition and metabolic activities. Number three, all the activities of an organism as a whole are the outcome of the activities and interactions of constituting the body of that particular organism. Next, each cell is made up of small mass of protoplasm having a nucleus bounded by a cell membrane with or without a cell wall. Certain cells have cell wall, other cells they don't have a cell wall. Then cells they are the hereditary unit of life, and as it contains a hereditary substance in its nucleus, which is known as DNA. And the growth of an organism, it involves the growth and multiplication of its cells. Cells, they grow and they multiply, which lead to the growth of the organism. These genetic pieces of information, they are stored inside the cell, and they are expressed there only, right? And basically all the cells, they are totipotent. Totipotent means one single cell, it can give rise to whole organism, right? For example, they made the sheep Dolly, right, from one single cell of another sheep. Each cell maintains its individuality. It has a specific internal environment and homeostasis. So this all makes the cell principle. Now, how the cell principle or cell theory has been used since ages, or you can think like, what's the need to make a cell theory? The cell theory or cell principle is it discovered truths about cells listed in the cell theory, and they are basis for studying the diseases, for studying the health, or for doing all the medical research going on in the world, right? And they help in finding cure for a number of disorders and diseases like AIDS, cancer, making preparation of vaccine, doing the cloning or the stem cell research, etc.